The autumn wind swept through Oakwood Cemetery, scattering fallen leaves across the manicured grounds in swirling eddies of amber, crimson, and rust. The air carried a sharp chill that tugged at the edges of Matthew Porter's cashmere coat as he wove his way through the silent rows of headstones. His polished Italian leather shoes crunched against the gravel path, the sound a stark counterpoint to the stillness, broken only by the occasional mournful coo of a mourning dove drifting through the crisp air. 10 years had elapsed since he last held his daughter, Sarah's hand. 10 years of a hollow mechanical existence where survival had eclipsed living. Before him stood her marble headstone, elegant and pristine, framed by maple trees, ablaze with the fiery hues of fall. The inscription read, "Sarah Elizabeth Porter, beloved daughter, forever 16. Kneeling, Matthew placed a bouquet of white roses, Sarah's favorite, against the cool stone, his fingers tracing the carved letters of her name in a ritual that had become his lifeline to her memory, a monthly pilgrimage through a decade of unrelenting grief. At 52, Matthew Porter cut the figure of a tech mogul at the zenith of his success. Silver threaded through his dark hair at the temples and fine lines etched around his eyes bore witness to years of relentless focus and ambition. Forbes had recently valued his company at $11 billion, a testament to his empire-building prowess, and his wealth afforded him luxurious homes in 5 countries, sprawling estates in London, a villa in Tuscany, a penthouse in Tokyo, a beachfront retreat in Malibu, and his primary residence in New York. Yet here, kneeling beside Sarah's grave, all titles and fortunes dissolved into irrelevance. He was simply a father, stripped bare by a loss that no amount of money could mend. Settling onto the small wrought-iron bench he'd had installed years ago beside her resting place, he prepared to engage in the one-sided conversation that had sustained him through his isolation, a quiet communion with a daughter whose absence had carved a void in his soul. The cemetery stretched out around him, a somber expanse of polished stones and fading flowers, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Matthew's gaze drifted across the familiar landscape, his mind sinking into the well-worn grooves of memory, when a flicker of movement caught his eye through the thinning branches of the maples. 4 small figures emerged several plots away, their silhouettes stark against the autumnal backdrop. They were children, girls of varying heights, clad in worn, mismatched clothing that spoke of hardship rather than carelessness. The oldest, perhaps 12, guided the youngest, no more than 6, with a steady hand, while the 2 middle girls clutched modest bundles of wild daisies, their white petals likely gathered from the roadside or a neglected field nearby. Matthew's curiosity stirred, momentarily lifting the weight of his sorrow. Children were rare visitors to this place of eternal rest, and their solitary presence piqued his interest. The eldest moved with a quiet authority, her auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, directing her sisters as they approached a modest grave. She knelt beside the youngest, helping her arrange the daisies with care, adjusting the blooms as if perfecting a small offering. The 2 middle girls stood close, their thin frames and smudged faces hinting at a life of deprivation. Their soft voices carried faintly on the breeze, too distant to discern, but the reverence in their posture was unmistakable. They formed a semicircle around the grave, heads bowed in a moment of silent reflection, until the smallest girl looked up, her bright smile cutting through the distance like a beam of sunlight. She waved enthusiastically at Matthew, her gesture unguarded and pure. Caught observing, he offered an awkward nod in return, expecting them to retreat after their ritual. Instead, after a brief huddle among themselves, the 4 began walking toward him, their steps tentative yet purposeful. As they drew closer, details sharpened into focus, The oldest bore eyes too serious for her age, a weight of responsibility etched into her young features. The smallest clutched a tattered stuffed rabbit, its single ear dangling pitifully, her blue eyes wide with innocent curiosity. The two middle girls hovered near, their clothing, a faded sweater, a patched dress, a too large jacket, bearing the marks of wear and neglect. When they reached him, the eldest stepped forward, her approach cautious but marked by a surprising poise. She explained they hadn't intended to disturb him, her voice steady despite the uncertainty in her stance. Matthew assured her they hadn't, his own surprise mirrored by an unexpected warmth at her composure. The youngest edged around her sister, peering at Sarah's headstone with interest, her curiosity spilling over as she pointed to the name and asked if it was Sarah's. Before Matthew could fully process her question, she proudly declared they were visiting Tia Sarah, their guardian angel, a figure their mother had woven into their lives. Confusion rippled through Matthew, deepening as the second oldest clarified that Tia Sarah was Sarah, a name their mother, Jessica Miller, had cherished and passed down to them. The name struck him like a physical blow, reverberating through the chambers of his memory. Jessica Miller, a nurse at Memorial Children's Hospital, her kind face and gentle hands, a constant in Sarah's final months. She had been the one to coax smiles from his daughter when despair reigned, a steady presence through the sleepless nights of chemotherapy and whispered fears. The eldest introduced herself as Emma Miller, naming her sisters in turn, Lily, Sophie, and Abby, each gesture revealing the tight-knit bond that held them together. She explained that their mother had passed 6 months earlier, but Jessica had always spoken of Sarah, embedding her memory in their hearts as a symbol of courage and light. The revelation tilted Matthew's world off its axis. Jessica had cared for Sarah during her battle with cancer, a connection he'd never fully appreciated in the haze of his own grief. When he asked about the promise tying their stories together, Sophie, the third sister, stepped forward, her voice carrying a solemnity that belied her years. Their mother had vowed to Sarah that she'd never be alone, a pledge born in the sterile glow of hospital rooms, and Sarah, in her waning days, had promised to watch over Jessica's children from heaven. Matthew rose slowly, drawn to the simple headstone the girls had adorned with their daisies. Jessica Marie Miller, beloved mother and healer, forever in our hearts. As he absorbed the inscription, Abby slipped her small hand into his, the unexpected warmth of her touch piercing the isolation he'd armored himself with for a decade. She asked if he was Sarah's daddy, and when he nodded, his throat too tight to speak, she declared with childlike certainty that their mother had told Sarah he'd be okay someday, easing her worries from beyond. A single tear escaped Matthew's eye, tracing a path down his weathered cheek, a crack in the fortress of his solitude. For 10 years he'd carried his grief like a shield, visiting this cemetery with mechanical precision, never imagining Sarah's life had rippled beyond him, preserved in these 4 girls with their wildflowers and worn shoes. Lily, the second oldest, offered a perfect white daisy from their collection, and together they placed it among the expensive roses on Sarah's grave. Matthew thanked them, his voice thick with emotion, sensing Sarah would have cherished the humble gesture amid the opulence of his tribute. As the wind rustled through the cemetery trees, picking up fallen leaves in a gentle dance, something fundamental shifted within him, a stirring of connection where only absence had reigned. That night, Matthew paced the cavernous halls of his New York mansion, a sprawling edifice of marble and glass that echoed with emptiness. The encounter with the Miller sisters replayed in his mind, their faces, Emma's guarded resolve, Abby's unguarded smile, haunting his thoughts. Memories of Sarah surged forth, intertwined with fragments of Jessica's kindness, her quiet strength a lifeline during those hospital days. when machines beeped relentlessly and hope dwindled. He wandered into his home office, a sanctum untouched by time, its leather chair and mahogany desk relics of a life before loss. The walls bore awards and framed articles, testaments to his rise as a tech titan. Yet they meant nothing now. In a bottom drawer, locked away for a decade, rested a box of Sarah's personal items, a Pandora's chest he'd avoided since her death. With trembling hands, he opened it, the scent of aged paper and faint lavender wafting up as he lifted her purple journal, its cover worn from daily use. For the first time since her passing, he turned the pages, her handwriting a bittersweet echo of her voice. An entry from 3 months before her death stopped him cold. She had written of Jessica's funny stories, Abby attempting to bathe the family cat with bubble bath, sparking laughter that had alarmed her mother into rushing to her bedside. Jessica had made the hospital less frightening, a haven amid the sterile terror, promising to look after Matthew if Sarah couldn't. Tears blurred his vision as he realized Sarah had feared for him, entrusting Jessica to pierce the walls he'd built around his heart. The doorbell jolted him from his reverie at 2 a.m., an intrusion into the silence he'd cultivated. James Anderson, his oldest friend and attorney, stepped inside, his blunt observation of Matthew's disheveled state brushed aside as Matthew explained the girl's connection to Sarah. Their neglected appearance, their thin frames, dirt-smudged faces, gnawed at him, a call to action he couldn't ignore. James sighed, warning that not everyone could be saved, but Matthew insisted this was different, a thread tying them to Sarah that demanded pursuit. Relenting, James promised an investigation into the Miller family by morning. Matthew returned to Sarah's journal, reading through the night as dawn painted the sky in muted grays. Jessica appeared in entry after entry, bringing small gifts like hand-knitted scarves, sharing tales of her daughters, sitting with Sarah when Matthew was trapped in boardrooms or overseas mergers. Her presence had been a balm, a constancy he'd taken for granted in his distraction. By the time the first rays of sunlight filtered through the mansion's towering windows, a resolve had hardened within him. He would find these girls again, not just to unravel their link to Sarah, but because their vulnerability had awakened a purpose he'd thought buried with his daughter, a flicker of meaning beyond the relentless march of his empire. The following Saturday he returned to Oakwood Cemetery, his heart pounding with anticipation as he lingered by Sarah's grave. He rearranged the roses with feigned nonchalance, his eyes scanning the winding paths for any sign of the sisters. The air was colder now, the trees shedding more leaves, their skeletal branches clawing at the overcast sky. After an hour, relief washed over him as 4 familiar figures emerged through the headstones, their steps slow but deliberate. Emma's protective stance stood out, guiding her sisters with a vigilance that belied her age. Lily moved with careful precision. Sophie's thoughtful gaze swept the surroundings, and Abby skipped despite the solemn setting, her stuffed rabbit bouncing against her side. Their worn clothing seemed even more threadbare in the daylight, a silent testament to their struggles. Emma's surprise at seeing him again softened into a cautious welcome as she reintroduced the Miller sisters, herself at 12, Lily at 10, Sophie at 8, and Abby, newly 6, formally cementing their bond in his presence. Matthew offered his name, and Sophie's eyes widened, recognizing Porter from school lessons about his tech empire before faltering, her words trailing off into an unspoken story. Lily explained they'd stopped attending school after their mother's death, a move tangled in bureaucratic hurdles their stepfather was too busy to resolve. Emma's guarded tone hinted at neglect, stirring Matthew's unease into a quiet resolve. Sensing their discomfort, he suggested hot chocolate at a nearby cafe, a simple gesture to ease the tension. 20 minutes later, seated in the cozy, wood-paneled space, he watched in quiet distress as they devoured pastries and steaming mugs with a hunger that spoke of days without proper meals. Even Emma, with her determination to appear in control, couldn't mask her need, her thin fingers trembling slightly as she reached for a second croissant. As they ate, Emma shared fragments of their past. Jessica had been a nurse for 15 years, her love for her work rooted in the children she cared for, especially Sarah, whose bravery and humor had left an indelible mark. Sophie added that their mother had celebrated Sarah's courage, her ability to make others laugh even in the depths of illness. Abby, chocolate smeared across her cheeks, declared that Jessica had called Sarah the strongest person she'd ever met. A perfect guardian angel. The words tightened Matthew's throat, a lump forming as their stories painted a picture of a woman who'd bridged his daughter's world with theirs. When Lily suggested showing him where they lived, Emma hesitated, her eyes flickering with wariness, but Matthew accepted, driven by an instinct to see the reality behind their resilience. James called as they walked, his voice crackling through the phone with preliminary findings. Jessica had died of pneumonia 6 months prior, leaving the girls with their stepfather, Victor Miller, a man with a record of petty theft and fraud. She'd inherited nearly $500,000 from a relative shortly before her death, but no trace remained, and their previous home, a modest house filled with memories, had been sold 3 months ago. The pieces aligned with the girls' vague mentions of upheaval, fueling Matthew's determination as they approached their apartment building. It loomed ahead, a crumbling 5-story relic with boarded windows and graffiti-scarred walls, its decay a stark contrast to the gleaming sedan he'd parked along the curb. Emma led them up a stairwell reeking of mildew and urine, the missing handrails a hazard they navigated with practiced ease. The third-floor apartment, though small, gleamed with the girls' desperate efforts to maintain order. A single mattress in the corner with neatly folded blankets, a rickety table holding school books and a few battered toys. The kitchen consisted of a hot plate and a mini fridge, its contents a half-gallon of milk and a few slices of bread, revealing the depth of their deprivation. Lily admitted Victor brought food sporadically when he remembered, her words heavy with resignation. Sophie tugged at Matthew's sleeve, revealing their mother's special box hidden beneath a loose floorboard. The battered shoebox contained photographs, letters, and a small leather-bound journal, a treasure trove of memories preserved against the odds. Among them was a picture of Sarah in her hospital bed, smiling despite the tubes and monitors, Jessica seated beside her with a warm, steady gaze. The sight shook Matthew to his core, a tangible link to a time he'd buried. A yellowed envelope held a letter in Sarah's handwriting, thanking Jessica for her friendship and asking her to remind Matthew to find happiness if she were gone. An echo of her quiet worry for him. Another envelope contained financial documents, Jessica's will, property deeds, and statements showing her inheritance, with a signature Matthew suspected was forged beside Victor's. As Abby showed him faded family photos, the contrast between their past joy, Jessica healthy and smiling, the girls well-dressed, and their current decline broke his heart. Earlier images captured a loving family in a sunlit backyard, the girls laughing as they chased a ball, Jessica beaming with pride. More recent ones revealed her deteriorating health, her frame thinning, and the girls' clothing growing increasingly worn, their smiles fading. Sophie's labored cough, Lily's unnatural thinness, and Emma's sharp wrists protruding from her sleeves underscored their neglect. A silent cry for help Matthew couldn't ignore. A text from James confirmed Victor's fraud and probation status, solidifying his resolve. The apartment door banged open and Victor stumbled in, his bloodshot eyes narrowing at the unexpected visitor, alcohol heavy on his breath. His hostility flared as he demanded to know Matthew's presence, the confrontation teetering on the edge of violence. Victor's slip, calling the girls his meal ticket, and his admission of squandering Jessica's inheritance ignited Matthew's fury, a cold fire burning beneath his calm exterior. As Victor threatened to call the police, Abby's cough worsened, a deep, rattling sound that shook her tiny frame, her face flushing alarmingly. Matthew's decision crystallized in an instant. Scooping her into his arms, he declared they were going to the hospital, daring Victor to stop him. The girls followed, piling into his car as he sped away, the city blurring past in a haze of urgency. In the rearview mirror, he caught Emma's eye, promising an end to their suffering, a vow he intended to keep no matter the cost. Matthew's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek glass tower in the heart of Manhattan, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering breathtaking panoramic views of the city's restless sprawl. The space was a monument to minimalist sophistication, muted grays and blacks, sleek furniture, and stark lines devoid of warmth or color. It had been designed for a solitary man, a fortress against the world, until now. The girls marveled at its height, Sophie pressing her nose to the glass, her breath fogging the immaculate surface as she whispered about living in the sky. Abby remained hospitalized with pneumonia, her condition stabilizing but requiring observation, while her sisters settled into this unfamiliar sanctuary. James arrived with shopping bags, clothes, toiletries, essentials, his assistant guessing their sizes, a practical gesture that softened the lawyer's stern demeanor as he greeted each sister. 24 hours after their escape from Victor's apartment, the penthouse began to shift under their presence. Lily ran her hand along the cool marble kitchen counter, observing its size dwarfed their entire building, while Emma hovered near Matthew, her vigilance unwavering as if expecting him to retract his aid. James pulled him aside, warning that Victor had filed a kidnapping report, claiming Matthew had stolen the girls. The accusation was absurd, countered by Abby's medical emergency and the hospital's report to Child Protective Services, but James cautioned that Victor's legal guardianship posed a challenge. Evidence of fraud, proof of neglect, and a compelling case for Matthew's custody would be needed, a battle requiring more than wealth. Matthew dismissed the complexity, his focus narrowing to the girl's safety, a mission tied to Sarah's memory that he couldn't abandon. Days blended into a tentative normalcy, the penthouse adapting to its new inhabitants. 3 days in, they attempted pancakes, their first home-cooked meal since Jessica's death, transforming the kitchen, once a sterile space for coffee and takeout, into a flour-dusted battlefield. Lily measured baking powder with Matthew's guidance, her small hands unsteady but determined, while Sophie sat cross-legged on the counter, reading a recipe from her phone. Emma flipped misshapen pancakes with intense concentration, her brow furrowed as if perfecting an art. The results were edible, if odd, a small victory they celebrated with laughter that echoed through the once silent rooms. These moments of normalcy bridged the vast chasm between Matthew's world and theirs, a fragile thread of connection weaving through their shared loss. Visiting Abby at the hospital became a daily ritual, the girls bringing hand-drawn cards and a stuffed rabbit Matthew had impulsively bought from the gift shop. Her fever had broken, her condition improving, though the doctors insisted on another day of monitoring. As they left, Lily slipped her hand into Matthew's, the casual trust catching him off guard, a child's faith in a man who'd once walled himself off from such bonds. Back at the penthouse, while the girls settled into a movie about princesses with magical powers, a film Matthew had never seen, he retreated to his office for a video call with James. The investigation had progressed. Victor's forgery of Jessica's signature on 8 documents was confirmed, her inheritance liquidated within 3 months of her death. Some assets, a boat, a car, gambling debts, could be reclaimed, but custody remained a tangled web. The temporary emergency guardianship held due to Abby's health, but permanent custody demanded proof of Matthew's commitment, a lifestyle shift from his 16-hour workdays and global travel. Emma's presence in the doorway interrupted the call, her expression unreadable as she carried in popcorn bowls, her voice neutral as she mentioned Sophie's preference for extra butter. How much had she heard? After James signed off, she lingered in the kitchen, methodically arranging the bowls, her words cutting through the silence. She insisted he didn't need to change his life for them, that their stay was temporary. Matthew leaned against the counter, meeting her gaze, and countered that he wanted it to be permanent, a declaration that hung between them. Her young face, weary from broken promises, studied him for a long moment before softening into a faint smile, a victory more profound than any corporate triumph. That night, checking on the girls, he found them asleep in their shared room. Sophie's head on Emma's shoulder, Lily curled around a stuffed cat, the sight stirring a painful yet necessary ache in his chest, a reawakening after years of numbness. Abby returned from the hospital on a Thursday morning, her small body still weak but her spirit undimmed. Her delighted squeals at seeing her sisters reverberated through the penthouse, a sound its walls had never contained. She explored on unsteady legs, marveling at its size, asking if Matthew had lived there alone. His honest answer, until now, marked a shift he felt in his bones. That evening, after the excitement settled and Abby was tucked in with her sisters, Matthew retreated to the balcony with a glass of scotch, the city lights spreading below like a carpet of stars. The view, once a symbol of his achievements, felt hollow compared to the 4 sleeping children inside. The balcony door slid open and Emma stepped out, wrapped in a blanket against the autumn chill, her inability to sleep drawing her to his side. They sat in companionable silence, the hum of the city a distant murmur, until she asked about Sarah. The question tensed him reflexively, but he forced himself to relax, surprised by how easily the words came after years of avoidance. Sarah had been extraordinary, brilliant, stubborn, compassionate, worrying more about others even in her sickness. Her refusal to complain, her mantra of using energy for living rather than lamenting, had shaped her final days. Emma pulled her knees to her chest, asking about Sarah's mother, Caroline, a name rusty from disuse. She'd died in a car accident when Sarah was 7, leaving her to grow up without a mother, a parallel that struck Matthew with unexpected force. He admitted he'd been less present after Caroline's death, burying himself in work, a pattern Emma recognized with a weary wisdom beyond her years, adults hiding from pain. She shared her own loss, Jessica's cough starting last winter dismissed as a cold, worsening until hospital care came too late, unaffordable until the end. Victor had arrived days after the funeral, claiming guardianship despite his absence, a marriage that had crumbled years before. The weight of Emma's responsibility, her promise to Jessica to keep her sisters together, mirrored Matthew's own burdens, a shared haunting by vows to the departed. Without thinking, he placed a hand over hers, affirming she'd protected them, kept them alive against impossible odds. In the faint reflection of the glass door, a tear slid down her cheek, her whispered longing for her mother echoing his daily ache for Sarah. They sat in the quiet darkness, 2 souls bound by parallel losses, while inside, 3 little girls slept peacefully for the first time in months. 2 weeks passed, the penthouse evolving from an emergency refuge into something resembling a home. Colorful artwork adorned the refrigerator, throw pillows lay perpetually askew, and children's laughter filled the once sterile rooms. Matthew sat in his office surrounded by legal documents, as James reviewed their strategy for the upcoming custody hearing. CPS's investigation had exposed Victor's neglect. Abby's medical records alone were damning, but Victor fought back, claiming Matthew had kidnapped the girls, painting himself as a grieving stepfather overwhelmed by tragedy. The accusation tightened Matthew's jaw, its absurdity tempered by James's warning that courts might view a wealthy bachelor's sudden interest in 4 girls with suspicion. A soft knock interrupted them. Emma entered with a tray of misshapen, slightly burned cookies, a gift from Sophie and Lily to thank him for art supplies. Matthew accepted them with genuine appreciation, the gesture a small bridge across their worlds. After Emma left, James pressed him on his commitment. 3 weeks ago, Matthew had been a solitary workaholic, Sarah's name unspoken for years, now fighting for custody of 4 traumatized children. His gaze drifted to a photo of Sarah on his desk, placed there by Lily, and he admitted that his empire meant nothing compared to the rightness of this purpose. James suggested Jessica's safety deposit box, mentioned by Emma as a potential key to their case. That afternoon, Matthew gathered the girls in the living room, broaching the idea of staying permanently. Abby's excitement at the prospect of forever clashed with Emma's darkened expression, her resolve against returning to Victor palpable. Sophie's quiet question about facing him again drew a promise. They'd never be alone. Lily's tentative hope of being like his daughters caught him off guard, prompting a suggestion they could be Miller Porters, honoring both past and future, a name Abby believed would please their mother and Sarah. Dark clouds gathered over the city skyline, pregnant with rain and foreboding as weather alerts warned of an approaching storm, potentially the worst in decades. Matthew stood at the penthouse windows, watching the sky darken to an eerie green-gray, the barometric pressure plummeting. He called the girls to finish gathering emergency supplies, water containers, lanterns, flashlights, preparing for the unknown. The past 3 days had been a whirlwind. James had secured a court order to access Jessica's safety deposit box, set for tomorrow, promising evidence against Victor. The custody hearing loomed the following week, but tonight the storm demanded focus. They transformed the media room into a cozy fortress, dragging in pillows and blankets, the girls' resilience shining through their preparations. By evening, the storm struck with full force, rain lashing the glass in horizontal sheets, wind howling around the building's edges. Halfway through a movie, the lights flickered and died, the backup generator humming to life before faltering under the tempest's assault. Matthew switched on lanterns, their warm glow pooling in the blackness as thunder crashed with bone-rattling force. Abby nestled into his lap, her stuffed rabbit clutched tight, requesting a happy story. He recounted Sarah's 6th birthday, a princess-themed celebration with a castle cake and a pony that nibbled her dress, drawing laughter and questions from the girls, their curiosity softening the storm's menace. Sharing these memories locked away for so long, he realized the pain no longer dominated. Joy had begun to seep through the cracks. A violent gust slammed the building, followed by Sophie's sudden wheezing cough, a sound too reminiscent of Abby's illness. Her breathing grew labored, her asthma flaring without her inhaler, lost somewhere in the chaos. Panic edged Emma's movements as she searched, Matthew coaching Sophie to breathe slowly, her lips tinting blue. The storm intensified, rendering a hospital run perilous, but necessity loomed as they scoured the penthouse in vain. The landline rang, a relic Matthew had forgotten, and Victor's slurred voice crackled through, admitting he'd taken Sophie's inhaler, threatening to reclaim his meal ticket. The call cut off as the elevator alarm blared. Victor was in the building, overriding security in the outage. Matthew locked the girls in the master bathroom, arming himself with a handgun from his safe, a relic from Caroline's insistence after Sarah's birth. Victor pounded the door, knife glinting in his hand, his threats escalating until Matthew disarmed him, pinning him with long, dormant skills. Emma alerted building security via a bedroom line, and within minutes, paramedics stabilized Sophie, police securing Victor as the storm abated. The next morning, the safety deposit box revealed no confession, only recordings of Victor's fraud, bank statements, and Jessica's letters, including one to Matthew entrusting him with her daughters, a mirror to Sarah's wish for his happiness. 3 months later, Victor awaited trial, the evidence overwhelming, and Matthew's temporary guardianship paved the way for adoption. Lily's 11th birthday transformed the penthouse, streamers, balloons, a chocolate cake with strawberry filling, a celebration of renewal. A baby grand piano and a necklace inscribed "Family Found, Not Lost" cemented their bond, Lily's embrace calling him Dad for the first time. 6 months on, the Miller Porters thrived, the penthouse alive with homework, music, and art. The Sarah and Jessica Foundation aided families, and on Family Day, a year after their meeting, they honored their past with a portrait uniting all 7, Matthew, the girls, Sarah, and Jessica, a testament to a promise fulfilled through loss, love, and healing.